The ACC and ESPN, which was a huge story for days after days after days, in the process of ratifying an extension of the television contract. Now, remember, there was an opt-out option, too. This looks like, it appears, Ross Dellinger with a very thorough article, as he does all the time, it appears as if they're going to make this happen. They're going to extend the contract. Why wouldn't they? And there is the possibility of making sure that the big boys get extra scratch, who are the ones carrying the conference.
Well, look, I thought for a while after the first, if FSU and Clemson were going to get out, I thought it was going to happen, like something would have come about that like would have let them out, or you would have heard a conference going, oh, hey, but when you've got people having to go all over the place and read documents and then, nobody understands how it really works, it just seemed more and more like this was going to have to head to a resolution, especially since the fact that they didn't really have anywhere to go.
I thought they were joining the Big 12.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I was told
So
last
since
year.
they didn't have anywhere to go, this was just a method to get what they wanted done, which is, multi-tiered distribution, which hasn't worked well for other conferences. Most of the time, it leads to a breakup. I do believe it'll lead to a shortening of the grant of rights for teams that want to get out in 2031, especially those. But there's other things that they're doing that I think are at least wise for the time being. But yeah, the AC, and yesterday, some of the the realignment pornographers out there were like, oh, here it comes. They haven't ratified the contract yet. Oh, this is UNC is going to be in the SEC. No, they're not. No, they're not. They ratified the contract. Nobody's going anywhere. This is where it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack from this. Obviously, it's good news for the ACC and the schools who aren't and haven't been threatening to leave for the last year or two. So at least for the time being, it appears as if you've got some steady waters, although there's still some choppiness and there's still some negotiating and some figuring out to be done, primarily on something like the grant of rights and whether or not that would be shortened to 2031. And also, just how do they continue to navigate that lawsuit? Like, this doesn't end the lawsuit with Florida State and Clemson, so that continues on, and without a resolution, that's still a pretty big loose end. But according to Ross's reporting, there's ongoing talks, and there is a better than not chance that they could come to an agreement of some sort that ends that lawsuit and gives Florida State and Clemson a little bit of something to tide them over and give them maybe a little bit more. And so there's negotiating ongoing right now between the ACC, Florida State, Clemson, and perhaps others. But in terms of, I think, trying to find an alternative to just, hey, let's continue to burn money in court against each other and then end up in the same place after another 2 years, and we just waste time and we waste money, right? So I think, that still remains to be seen, but it doesn't appear as though, in regards to that part of the story, that there's any shockwave that's on the other side. Like, they're going to work it out or they're not, or the lawsuit's going to move. Like, they're going to work it out and figure out an agreement, or the lawsuit's just going to continue to move forward. But there's not any lever that's going to be pulled where sooner rather than later those guys are just jumping off to the SEC and or the Big Ten or whatever the rumor may have been, depending on what corner of the internet you saw it from. So I think that's all very interesting and useful information to know that there's that element of it where for right now that's going to tamper down and they'll figure out the lawsuit part of it. So I know that's not necessarily what a Florida State or a Clemson fan wanted to see, or maybe even a North Carolina fan. This doesn't mean that they're locked down till 2036, because as you said, they could agree on a shortened grant of rights, and so teams get out in 2031. But what year are we in right now? 2025.
Yeah.
So only a month into it, too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And let's face it, though, I don't know if I mentioned on the show or not, but I've definitely been thinking about it as the season was coming to a close. I was like, I wonder how long it is before the realignment spree starts, because all of the news starts to slow down.
A week. It was 1 week.
It was 1 week. And you could predict it, and I did predict it. And so it was just kind of funny to see that ball get rolling, I guess. You pointed out something to me, and I was just like, yeah, here we go. And then today this story drops, and I thought the timing was hilarious because, there's a bunch of people that just feel like they got cut off at the knees. But this isn't the end-all, be-all, but it does cut some of the noise out a little bit for the time being, and it does end some narratives, certainly, as well, that were out there that in some cases were never believable, and you could see through if you had half a brain cell anyways, like the Big 12 being involved to some extent or whatever. That was clearly not as about to happen as it was portrayed to be, perhaps, nor have other parts of this story been. So, it's a great update. We were waiting to see what was going to happen with the extension, and I think as most expected, ESPN said, why would we get rid of all this content and all of these games and this agreement and this investment? It would make no sense for them, so they're getting the option to pick up, and they're picking up, and I think that's very interesting.
Xavier Wolf, come on, 365. All summer long, you all predicted the ACC would die. SMU was joining a dying conference, and so I put it up on the chat room. Show me a piece of evidence we ever said they would die, and I'll give you $1,000 cash. What we said, we were describing that they need to make sure they get this thing together or they would fall apart. And we've seen others, like we've seen the Pac-12. Oregon State and Washington State right now are kind of still stranded, if you think about it. And there are some schools in the ACC that could have been Oregon State and Washington State. I am for, and I'm so glad, and I hope that this all does work out, that all of the conferences, and I hated the realignment. It was great for us, but I love the fact the ACC appears to be moving forward.
I, as a fan of a school in the ACC, I'm one of the rare ones who thinks it's better for Florida State and Clemson to be where they are.
It's better for the Big 12.
It's better for everybody that they stay put. I know that, there's a money element to this. And, look, I want my school to make as much money. I want everybody to make as much money as they can. I mean, I'm all for them making money, but not at the expense of cutting off your nose to spite your face. Now, in 2031, when we could get another shakeup because of these TV deals and the playoff will be, 7-8 years in by that time, and you'll kind of know what the TV networks want, what the schools think is viable, who, in the new era of the House settlement, whenever that all gets worked out, because it's still, going to be a bit of a legal nightmare for everybody going forward. So by 2031, we should have some answers in all of this, which it takes a long time. It just can't happen like that. That's how the world works. I think it's better. I think it's better for right now. And, you may not be making as much money, but, they're give you time to find other avenues as opposed to just doing kind of, willy-nilly.
Having 4 conferences is better than having 3 conferences if you're not the SEC or the Big Ten. And I am going to call whoever that was out because you're totally full of it. You're absolutely full of it in terms of we did not spend all summer talking about realignment. We actually talked about it very little.
Yep.
If you're talking about 3 years ago when we were all over the Big 12 and that happened with the Pac-12, then we talked about it a lot then. We talked about this and mostly talked about how a lot of it just seemed like a bunch of BS. We did not predict that the Big 12 was going to go get FSU and North Carolina and Clemson. We did not get into any of that and just said, okay, I guess if that happens, then that's crazy. But I think you're barking up the wrong tree. I don't mind admitting when I'm wrong, but I know I'm not wrong on this. We have absolutely not pushed that narrative. We discussed headlines as well as anybody else, but I think you're confusing us with perhaps some other shows out there.
One of the things that we actually at times get criticism for is that we don't talk about realignment enough, and are some what I call realignment ambulance chasers. We could bring something up every single day, but bottom line is the ACC, it appears as if they're headed towards being stable. That was always the best for everybody involved and for the Big 12. So I would never want the ACC. We have a guy that contacts us sometimes on Twitter about the ACC and the ratings, and I think he felt a little bit bitter because they were attacked. They were under attack, but nothing anywhere like what the Big 12 went through when they lost everything.
Now, I will admit to something. I said that FSU and Clemson are doing this to leave.
Of course they are.
And but I always said, but the question is, when can they do that? And I don't think that changes even with the settlement, that there's whatever settlement happens is going to shorten the window or at least the penalty for them leaving if they do in, say, 2031. But that's still, they did this so they could find a way to leave quicker.
You did not predict the death of the ACC.
No.
You did not predict a bunch of teams jumping over. You did not predict. No, we discussed the actual headlines. That's what we've always done. So again, I'll say to that person, I think you got us confused. But we'll admit when we're wrong. We don't have any problem doing that. And quite frankly, the easy thing to do would be to just get into it and not care about what might be true or not. We try to deal in reality as much as we can. So that's why sometimes we just don't even touch on something at all, because we look around like, does that really make any? No, it doesn't. Okay, yeah, we're not going to talk about that. So, yeah, I think this is great news for the ACC. Obviously, you still have a lot of things to figure out. I think it's, if you were hoping for some sort of Big 12 risk game where you're conquering lands and all that, this isn't great news. But I don't really think the conference benefits all that much from getting bigger and bigger and bigger as it is. Sure, you want to add brands, but I just never bought into that. And I think our big point last summer was, why would you sue to just go to the Big 12? Mm-hmm. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So that was where I think our main thought was. This obviously isn't a story that's over, but this is a pretty big part of it where you kind of had this circle that it wasn't the end-all, be-all. Like, if they picked up the option that this was going to just go quiet for 10 years, because clearly, like we talked about again, they could negotiate the exit date. But this was a date or a time that was kind of looked at as they're expected to pick it up, but is there that off chance that they might not? So everybody got their answer today and can move accordingly. And I think I've already seen a few people shift their positions based on this news. And we'll go forward and see what it looks like and what kind of agreement they can come to. And obviously that lawsuit still continues. So, until they come to an agreement, that's going to go on.
Thanks to a lot of those of you when we mentioned that we could do what we could go into that every day. We're not going to be that podcast. We're going to do it when it's valid. Here's the question, though. So they do have an incentive-laden type distribution financially, correct?
Well, another part we failed to mention was the scheduling. There's talks about, for example.
No, I want to get into that because it's kind of hooked into this, not quite, but it is. So there is extra revenue incentives, correct? If you perform well,
right?
And it's so weird. The first year they started doing that, in a way, was to appease Clemson, Miami, and maybe Florida State, North Carolina. And Florida State didn't get any of that money.
No,
they didn't get any of that money.
But I think we had to give money back. I think,
no.
Honestly, no.
But one of the things that I did, and Craig, you brought this up, this is the part that got my attention. I love bangers, football games with big names, alphas, logos, and that's what you were getting ready to go to, Craig, about Clemson and Florida State and others having a chance to play Notre Dame more often.
Yeah, for the Notre Dame needs to join a conference crowd, this was not great news. That's another party that's not too happy with today because Notre Dame's still not joining a conference, and they have less reason to now than they ever did before with their national championship appearance run. But part of what was talked about in the article I was reading was, in addition to obviously figuring out kind of how to reward the money and do that perhaps a different way, was the scheduling piece of this, which the main detail that was out there, correct me if I'm wrong, but was that they were looking at a way where Notre Dame, to, I guess, appease the biggest brands, they would play two of the three biggest brands in the ACC on a pretty much every year basis, and those would be Florida State, Miami, and Clemson. And so basically Notre Dame would be guaranteed, or those programs would be guaranteed, like every year you're going to play Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's guaranteed that every year they would be playing two of those three teams to give them two big marquee games.
Yeah, and that's mutually beneficial. And look, Notre Dame versus Syracuse and Notre Dame versus Wake Forest is not moving the needle like those other games are. And we talked about just yesterday about the Big 12 and how they messed up years ago by not having Oklahoma and Nebraska every year. Look, if you're the ACC and this is about television ratings and you have a partner like Notre Dame that can help you get those ratings, whose ratings are consistent. Like, the thing is, Notre Dame will have some big spikes, but what you do know from Notre Dame is every week they're getting at least like 4 million viewers. Mm-hmm. Like, $4 million every week for Notre Dame, no matter who they play. And when they play Clemson, they probably get 7. And when they play Florida State, they probably get 7. When they play Catholics versus convicts the first week of this year, they're probably going to get like 8 or 9. That's going to be a big deal game right there, because that's going to be 2 teams loaded for bear and competing for the playoff right off the bat. So why would you, as a conference, be like, oh, no, we have this scheduling model that we have to rigidly stick to, so that instead of Clemson versus Notre Dame, they will make sure that they play Pitt. And you're like, well, I mean, who cares about Clemson and Pitt if you can get Clemson and Notre Dame and help you out? Pitt, I don't think Pitt cares as much. Like they might. But
by doing that, it helps and it can hurt them getting to the playoff.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about a game that is obviously maybe a 50-50 split, but that's what the conference needs, and that's how when you start winning those games, and most of them are going to win more than often than not, you start to have nice quality wins on your schedule.
Well, and it's worth pointing out that next year Notre Dame doesn't play any of those teams.
Nope.
They don't play a single one of those 3. So you talk about scheduling with a purpose and
they
the
play
biggest
Miami
games
neast year.
Do they?
Yeah, I think Notre Dame starts
they
at
do.
Miami.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. They play I'm sorry about that. They play Miami and Florida State in 26. They play Clemson in 27, and they play Clemson and Miami in 28. So I don't know how all that would be set up or changed, but that wasn't. I didn't notice that at first, but they do play Miami the first game next year, so that's good to know. But there are 2 of the next 3 years where they play only one of those 3 teams, and is that the best you can do for your TV partner or whatever? No. So it makes sense that one of the things in this story today was that you would play 2 of those 3, and then vice versa. 2 of those 3 get the opportunity to play Notre Dame every year. So it seems like a win-win and a nice gesture and something that all those parties can agree on, even though they might not agree on a lot of the other stuff.
All right, so there we are with that story, the ACC, and the fact that this looks like it's good news moving forward for quite some time.